The way that I've ordered the speakers today is our first two speakers will focus on what climate change means for politics. So Kristina Fidali here, who's a PhD candidate of University of New England, is that right, in Armidale, will talk us through what climate change means for politics at really local levels and what that means in terms of governance with a case study from the Solomon Islands. Esealofa, her recording raises more questions than answers, I think, in terms of what climate change means for governance at a national level when your state faces the existential threat of climate change. And then the second half of our session, we've got Dr. Mema Motusaga, who is the CEO of the Ministry of Women, Community and Social Development, I've got that right, in Samoa, who recently undertook a survey with young people in Samoa about their attitudes to climate change and whether they feel heard in this respect. And there's many things going on with that. And last but not least, we'll finish with Betty Barkha, who is a PhD candidate at Monash University. And Betty's research has really uncovered some important things that we need to think about in terms of intersectional politics at local levels and how those power relationships can really affect who is assisted and who is left out by responses to climate change. So I'll hand over to Kristina.
I'd like to start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered today and pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging. The 10 minutes that I have, I wish to bring to your attention some of the key themes in my research work, which I'm currently doing now. And I want to bring us back more closely to our communities at home. So I'm looking at community transformation in terms of the small p politics. So we're talking about negotiation and interactions between community tribal leaders. So that's what we're going to look at today. Yeah, so really the discussion is around complexity of the communities that we come from or we live in are not that simple as we realize now with the emergence of climate change and the complexity of the issues that we're facing. And here I'm talking about the complexity with climate change in terms of resource management. And in the communities, we would be talking about the fish and the turtles and all the resources that we depend on daily basis for our livelihood. That would include that. And not only that, our well-being is important, but it also, the additional pressure of movement of people now that we have along the coastline. So in my case study, I have an example of a movement of group of people from the Kiribati, into the Solomon Islands who have now added on to the local population in terms of the harvesting of the resources. So we have an additional pressure on the resources from induced movement of climate change. And this creates tension on the way that we manage resources and the way that we want to deal with climate change in terms of these tensions that we now have. So the themes that I'm going to talk to you today is drawn from the perspective of community leaders, those who are managing resources from the community level. So we're talking about landowners as well in this group of people. So I just want to bring to your attention what I'm really talking about in terms of resource management. The key resource that the community is managing is a hawksbill turtle. So the hawksbill turtle has a history of near collapse in terms of the exploitation of resource for overseas markets. The turtle sales was very expensive. They are sold to markets in Europe, Japan, and the UK in history. So it was really severely depleted in the 1800s. And on top of that, the movement of people and the migration also adds pressure. And by the 1980s, it was near collapse. So that was an ecological crisis that what the community wanted to address. And initially the government was the one who had the intervention of managing the resource, and there was a serious conflict between the community and the government, which led to the entire burning down of the facilities, the research center, which was established for managing the hawksbill turtles. So that comes with the community responsibility. What do they really want out of managing their resources? So the location of the research I'm doing is in Inanavon Islands. So if you can see the yellow highlights there, those are 3 local communities that are collaboratively managing the resource with the government. And Katupika and Kia are tribal communities. They have the tribal ownership of the land. And Wagina is a migrant community which joined the group of communities who are collaboratively managing with the government the hawksbill turtle. So the interesting thing that I would like to see it as transformative is the fact that the 2 tribal communities, it's very, very difficult for us to forfeit the land rights, to opt for a co-management. So this is a process that led to the 2 tribal communities having to do that, or being willing to forfeit their tribal land rights and to acquire or come into a more inclusive representation of the governance aspect that they're dealing with. So in the end, they agreed to do a co-management with the government over the hawksbill turtle. I think I have mentioned, or if I haven't clearly mentioned, that there is an ecological crisis that we're dealing with, the depletion of the hawksbill turtle. And also I think I mentioned that the tribal communities were not too happy about the government leading the intervention, so they end up burning down the research center. So there is a multiple crisis happening here. And I want to highlight something that's very clear in the research, is that there is a period of sleep that the informants termed it a sleep period, which is the period after this burning down of the facilities and the government wasn't there, it wasn't present in the community or in any activities. And this is a period where the tribal leaders consider as very important for them. They call it the sleep period. And they use the sleep period when no one is talking to them. It was almost very silent. The government wasn't there, the community wasn't there. And the research found that they used this as a reflective period. It was very important for them. And I'll skip the other 3 points. And I'll talk more of the sleep period in the next slide. But the other processes that led to the transformation is a very community-based negotiation, consultation, and awareness program, which includes both learning and negotiation happening at the same time. And as you can see there, it's 5 years of doing that work. Consultation and building in the incentives and the benefit sharing, as well as starting the organization and putting in the laws and the regulations for the management of the resource. So what we have is now we're moving from an open source resource management and now into a co-management as a result of these pressures that we have. And the agreement to share power and to relinquish power from the tribal leaders is what I see as very transformative here. The fact that the migrant community is given power to co-share in itself is also very important in this context. And the tribal leaders being willing to see that they build this new representation in terms of how they manage the resources is also very important in terms of managing the crisis that we have just talked about. And the presence of the government is as a co-implementer or a joint partner, as well as the Nature Conservancy. So these are the key partners who are involved in the co-management. As my research is focused on the processes and the conditions that facilitate the resilience in this management process, I think I just want to make use of this time to point out one key important condition in relation to the transformation of the tribal landowners. And I want to emphasize the tribal landowners here because I think those of us who come from the islands recognize that it's one of those challenges. It's very difficult for us to give away the land rights aspect of managing a resource. So I want to highlight something that happened that really triggers this change in the process that tribal landowners have used. So I talked to you earlier about the sleep period. And what happens to the sleep period? The 4 bullet points after it is exactly what the process that the landowners have gone through in coming out on the other side of relinquishing their power, relinquishing their rights. So there was a period of self-reflection, and interestingly, the research found that most of the learning that happened and the self-reflection process happens outside of formal workshops, outside of formal training sessions. So they're more one-on-one basis or people who they trust. The chiefs would talk to them. So there a lot of questioning, a lot of dealing with the cultural expectation, the sense of hopelessness, the sense of being ridiculed because they were no longer able to practice their tribal rights happens at that stage of the process. So once they get over that, there's a period of reconciling what they would give away and what they would keep in terms of their traditional rights. So it's interesting to note that they were willing to give away the structural aspects of their rights, but they were not willing to give away the connections that they have to the resources that they're looking after. So it comes to the acceptance. It still seems that there is acceptance, but with conditions. There are things that they want to forfeit and other things that they don't want to forfeit. And importantly, the transformation, I think, is evidence in the fact that they have humility in their new representation, in the way they talk in the board, in the way they resolve problems. They're more consultative, they're sitting back, and they're taking the views of the migrants as equally important to them as anyone else within the co-management. I think before I sit down, I think my time is nearly up. I just also wanted to point out that in the co-management, I think I listed the important key players there, but I also want to point out that the co-management is very evolutionary. The women were not there in the beginning when the formation of the members for the co-management started. They were not there. They were really not present at all. But as the success of the project come about and new problems emerge, some of these problems, they found out that even with this level of cooperation between the board, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to solve some of the emerging problems, which has to do with the connection between the community and the board. They realized that women are the ones who have the networks that link the church, the children, the households, the schools, and everything else in the community is networked through women. So women become the chosen ones. They become the leaders in terms of the emerging problems that the conservation is dealing with. So even though women were not in the board, they were not equally represented in the board. But if you think about the future and the sustainability of this conservation and the number of women who are involved, I think it would be safe to say that they were leading, in a sense, in the conservation. So this political transformation does include women. It does include the inclusivity of women, both migrant and non-migrant women. So networks play a really important role there. I'm sorry, I think I have to wrap up. I think I just want to, bring to your attention a few of the important points that I want to point out. I think attitude is one of the important things that I want to highlight here. And attitude particularly in seeing the crisis. I seem to believe that we see crisis as something not too positive. But if we look at crisis as an opportunity to do something different, then crisis is really something transformative, as we can see in this example. I also want to highlight learning and raise the question of who is actually learning and how and when. I think if we look at the crisis that we are dealing with and the period of sleep, it was very important to recognize that if you think of it in the other sense, if you think of it in the sense that we have a crisis and we really need to intervene as soon as possible to get these people out of the problem, then we probably might have disturbed this period of self-reflection that is offered to the tribal leaders. We might have dismissed that if we're not aware of the timing of our intervention into this process of change. So I'm highlighting that it's important to reflect on crisis in terms of learning. When we are learning, how we're learning, who actually is learning is probably something that we need to explore more. Partnership, we realize that, the study is showing that partnership is important, but not just cooperation in partnership. We realize, the study shows that the chiefs has to adapt. They have to go beyond that cooperation. It's not enough for us to stop at cooperation. We have to go beyond that and adapt. And adaptation requires a lot of effort and time. Inclusion and migration, I have to wrap up. I think we can look at it as a system. Don't look at just the activities, look at the broader system so that you can facilitate your resources appropriately. I'll stop there for now. I think I ran out of my time. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Kristina, for summing up 4 years of research in the space of 10 minutes, and sorry to rush you along. I think it's these presentations are going to raise a lot of questions, and we'll hold them till the end. I think it's just reflective of the fact that we haven't had a face-to-face State of the Pacific for 2 years, so we're jamming a lot in today.
I am currently a Tuvalu High Commissioner to Fiji, but before this, I was Tuvalu's Attorney General. I was born and raised in Tuvalu, and the effects of climate change is something that we were born into, and I believe we will try to address. Therefore, when an opportunity like this conference presents itself, and I was invited to speak, it is an opportunity that we wholeheartedly accepted. And we wish to thank the Elise and the Department of Public Affairs at ANU for the opportunity that was provided for us to be part of this conference. I have been given 10 minutes to present the domestic politics of climate change in Tuvalu. And for this year's State of the Pacific Conference, my focus will be on Climate security is the number one threat to Tuvalu, and what the country is currently doing to address it within its capabilities. I have mentioned within its capabilities for Tuvalu for two important reasons. Climate change as an existential threat to Tuvalu is not new. It has been around the global discussions for years. And so this discussion will focus specifically on Tuvalu's own initiative and how to address climate change. And secondly, it is easier for Tuvalu to address climate change from within its means and capabilities of what it can control rather than controlling other countries. So, before expanding on my talk, let me put Tuvalu into the context of this discussion. Tuvalu is made up of 9 islands that are spread over an area of water of more than 1.2 million square kilometers. The total land area of the 9 islands that made up the Tuvalu group is only 26 square kilometers. So we can imagine if we divide these 26 square kilometers into this vast ocean of 1.2 million square kilometers, we can appreciate that they are tiny specks in the middle of nowhere, deep ocean. Accordingly, the ocean to us is very important. It is us, we are the ocean. We breathe and live with the ocean in Tuvalu day in and day out. We wake up in rising seas, we sleep in the seas. We see the sea on either side of wherever we can walk in the island in Tuvalu. So for every rising tide, it brings its own beauties and joys for us Tuvaluans. But at the same time, too, the leaders are conscious, as well as the people, that they also bring their own fears. So do we just sit back and accept it, that it is a normal part of our life now, climate change is part of Tuvalu, we live with it? Or do we continue our fight for better kind of justice for Tuvalu? So let me take it to Tuvalu's approach. And on Friday, the 23rd of this month in New York, the Honorable Prime Minister of Tuvalu reiterated before the United Nations that climate change and its consequential sea level rise, they remain the single greatest existential threat for Tuvalu in the Pacific. The IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, will release its report in 2021 that provided clear scientific data, which means that if the data is clear that we will be meeting the target, the Paris target 1.5 degrees, and what that means for Tuvalu is that Tuvalu will be totally submerged within this century. And that is why, for Tuvalu, this is a matter of life and death, and they are serious about addressing the impact of climate change. To be in line with this year's theme of watershed moments and transformative solutions for interlocking challenges at the UN, while individual members have their own take on this, it is fitting that Tuvalu is already taking its part within its capabilities to providing solutions to this threat. And while honoring the UN's peace and security approaches, and what is peace and security for a country that is destined by the size of climate change to disappear within this century? Some people may see Tuvalu's domestic approach too ambitious, but when you're certain of death, you may as well throw in everything you have while you are alive. And for that, Tuvalu has come up with 3 important ventures that it is looking into at the moment. One, it has this Future Now project, or Doaga. We also have established with Antigua and Barbuda the Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change and International Law. And thirdly, there's a continuous dialogue with countries on free access to Tuvalu nationals. So what are these exactly? I'll start with a third one because I think it's more simple than the first 2. The dialogue with other countries has been to allow individuals easier pathways for accessing travels to these countries that may readily accept Tuvaluans to travel to their countries. And this is a better option for individuals rather than a relocation issue that brings its own complexities. But this is an opportunity for Tuvaluans to be able to move freely, have a feel for themselves in different countries, and see where they can make a better future for themselves. If the warring sea level rise is just too much for them in country to think about. The existing labor mobility regimes in the Pacific that are already in existence and being utilized, while it brings better means of financial assistance to most Pacific Island countries, Tuvalu, it also brings with them very strict and complex ways of accessing these labor opportunities. And not only that, they provide with them certain connotations of the work that's been offered to our people. So while it offers better paying jobs for our people, from low-paying countries like ours, we will accept them. They are better than what they have in country. But we believe there are better opportunities and better ways that people could be treated throughout the global community. We need a better access arrangement and better treatment for people as humans in search of better opportunities. Relocation is not an issue for us at the moment because of the complications it brings, but we are looking at arrangement for better, more freer access of our people to go to different countries within the laws of those international countries and feel for themselves what the places are like if in the event that they do want to migrate. The second initiative that Tuvalu is working on is the setting up a commission of small island states of climate change and international law that they established at Barkha last year. And this body is formed within the existing international law regime that authorizes the establishment of this body. And this commission is authorized to seek before the International Tribunal of Law of the Sea advisory opinion on matters that the commission will agree as important issues to be addressed in relation to climate change. And then to the final part of the initiative that I was talking about is the Future Now project. There are three important aspects of this the project that the government has endorsed. And the first one is providing a digital nation, seeing towards the digital nation, digitizing the whole country, whole island, and even government documents, everything will be digitized, and like a twin version of the existing Tuvalu now will be digitized. The details of the other details of how it relates to human beings that cannot be digitized. It's something that the country will be working on as we move along. We also within this project continue dialogue with countries. I hope that within the existing international regime we'll be able to get international recognition for Tuvalu's statehood and our permanency of our existing maritime boundaries. And within all this too, Tuvalu is within that project, which is to utilize the Tuvaluan values of communal living, shared responsibilities, and good neighborhood principles as a guide in international engagement and discussion on matters that impact the whole community. Other than that, what are the major challenges that Tuvalu may face in implementing these initiatives? As usual, there are matters that are impacting Tuvalu because of the impact of climate change, but accessing climate finance is very difficult. And it's also one of the major challenges that the Pacific and Tuvalu is facing at the moment. That we have an existing international law regime that already provide for matters that Tuvalu is trying to address, and it may not be easy, or it's not a simple matter to accept, but it's a way of starting the dialogue towards those areas. And then we also have increasing costs, both in terms of economic and social costs, that are caused by the increasing severity of cyclones because of climate change. It's impacting directly into Tuvalu and other Pacific island countries. And that also brings with it this the loss and damage issues that beyond just physical loss, but the loss of statehood, mass migration, displacement. These discussions have been ongoing for years in this climate discussion. So to conclude, climate change remains the #1 threat to Tuvalu. It is an existential threat that a country has to deal with, and Tuvalu is utilizing existing international law regime to assist the country in addressing climate change, within Tuvalu's capabilities. It is also continuing its dialogue with countries on improving visa access for its nationals. And it's also using existing United Nations bodies. These have been in existence for years. Tuvalu is utilizing those bodies to provide guidance on issues that it's in infancy, but Tuvalu is dialoguing with countries and hoping that we will be able to progress and fine-tune the project as we go along. And as I previously mentioned, when you are certain of the impact, and as the scientists provided, if we don't work together to address climate change, Tuvalu is amongst those countries that will be disappearing soon. And we may appreciate that the country will throw in everything that we have to try and address the issue of climate change nationally and internationally.
So we're going to hand over to Mema now, who's going to shift focus a bit. So what we've done so far is think about the impacts of climate change for politics. And now we're looking at what the impacts of politics and inclusion mean for people's experiences of climate change. Thank you, Mema.
Ya mana tu lewa malamai halu whanau moe o nei taia o wa tau mai le wana tiu o lo maupea lango le wana whaua whanau. Whatu lomo whakoi la au tui wanu I paia mamalu o Samoa o Potopoto. O Samoa o li poi tutongo le malu nei ia e al tapua I ngā Samoa o lo tapua I mai I whanua. Whatalo whaloa ia I le tapua ingan tanga ringo tinamta mai taia tina e unu mafio anga mama so ta. Tapua inga le fio ngai le minsta o le fio ngai aleota laki la mostelesio. Tainane le minsta la mulano le tofa se wa mui fastoma. Ale lo lo tanga ringo tinamta mai taia o na tulanga falupi. Whatalo whatu I Samoa Potopoto I le malune. Tapua I maia se faisata to sawi amanubal nei tai au. First and foremost, I want to pay my respect to the indigenous landowners of the marae that I'm speaking on today, past and present. I bring you warm greetings and talo falava from Samoa, and in particular from the Ministry of Women's Community and Social Development. I want to acknowledge also my fellow panelists, powerful women. And I want to thank you, Madam Moderator, for allowing the Ministry of Women, Community and Social Development to contribute to the Talanoa this morning on the domestic politics of climate change from the perspective of the Samoan young people and children. I am given 10 minutes, so I will try and be brief. If I can't, then I'm not sorry, but I ask for your understanding, as we hardly get the chance to speak to, a forum of intellectuals such as yourselves. Children are referred to or are defined as all individuals in Samoa under the age of 18.
and they make up 44% of Samoa's overall population. On the other hand, young people are defined as all individuals in Samoa from the ages of 15 to 34, as defined in our national youth policy, and they constitute 42% of Samoa's total population. The high number of children and young people identified represents a significant interest group of Samoa society, thus requiring substantial investments for their development in all aspects of life, and most importantly, that they are included in all decisions at all levels. Just to give you a bit of background as to how we, and when I say we, it's me, the young person, and me as the child, at the community level, from Lalomanu all the way to Falealupo. Just to give you a background of how we contribute to the decision making in Samoa. Now, Samoa's social structure is already designed, as you see on top here. Originally, it started off with just the triangle, known as the Tawhatolo le Tofa Manino. Later, the contribution of young people and our children and the wives of our chiefs and orators were recognized. Therefore, the addition of the two extra pillars, which is now known as the Tawhalima le Tofa Manino. The chiefs or the matais head the family. He or she represents all the voice of all the family members in the village council and all the decision-making platforms. So even though we, young people and children, are not in the house of the council, physically, it is the understanding that the family chief represents their voice, our voice, and speaks to us to and about our interests. Samoa ratified the Convention on the Right of a Child, CRC, on the 11th of November 1994. Samoa's initial submission to the Committee on the Right of a Child in 2005 did not report any work implemented in regards to climate change from the perspective of children and youth, therefore indicating a lack of urgency regarding the climate change and its impacts. The tsunami of 2009 directly affected 5,000 people of our population. A total of 64 children, 36 males, 28 females died during the tsunami, which is about 45% of the total number of fatalities. The high number was due to mainly the disaster preparedness issues. Now, prior to the tsunami and after the tsunami, we suffered a series of cyclones. We've just recently had to respond to devastating impacts of unreasonable and very unusual flooding, mainly in the urban areas. These strategic events pushed Samoa into action to ensure that not only there are legislations in place, but also awareness program, disaster preparedness and disaster management programs were developed and implemented throughout the country. Now, turning the crisis into an opportunity for us. Samoa reported on the status of its human rights in 2015. And in response to that report, the Committee on the Right of the Child commended Samoa's efforts against climate change, but recommended that more be done to take into account the special needs of our children and our youth, including children with disability, when developing disaster risk reduction preparedness, response, and recovery programs. The need to increase children's awareness and preparedness for climate change and natural disasters. And lastly, the recommendation to include children and youth in the development of our legislations, our programs, which is an integral part of the CRC. Now, the UN CRC committee decided to draft general comment on children's rights and the environment with a special focus on climate change in June 2021. And countries were asked to provide submissions. regarding the consent note that the committee put forth, and these are all available online. In continuing its efforts to address all gaps and issues highlighted throughout the world, consultations are currently being implemented. These consultations include a specific questionnaire that was developed for children and young people across multiple countries to complete online. Now, for the sake of Samoa, there's an outcry and advocacy from the Samoan diaspora, young people and children. But that does not represent the lived experiences of our youth and children on the ground. So as the mandated government body for youth and children affairs in country, we decided to put in a submission. How did we go about in doing that? There was a questionnaire drafted by the UNCRC committee, but we had to translate it so our children and our young people understood what it was about, its objectives and everything. And we also contextualized it because some of the questionnaire was not relevant to our context. 629 young people participated, young people and children participated from across the country. Now the questionnaire was translated and contextualized, and then it was distributed through our government women representatives and our government representatives who are members of the ministry but based at the village level. Now there were more women, more young girls and young women participated in the survey than men. Those who responded to the questionnaire included children from the ages of 5 right up to 35. The questionnaire had 45 questions. Now that's a lot, but given that I'm only given 10 minutes, I've decided to focus on maybe 3 main questions. Now there was a questionnaire about has your life or community changed because of the consequences of climate change? 303 responded yes, 309 responded no, and those who responded no were really the majority of the children from the ages of 5 to 10, which really speaks to their understanding of what climate change is in country and what it means for a village boy or a village girl. There was a question, if yes in 5A, please explain what effects of climate change have caused the change. Some of them, 32%, no response. I think they were still struggling to understand what that really meant for them at the village level. 27% high and extreme temperatures, very hot, the humidity is unbearable at times. Flooding 10%, heavy rain, events, storms and cyclones 27%. There was a follow-up question of which of the following statements best describe how they feel as children and as young people. Now 249 responded that I feel worried about the health of the environment and climate change. 204 responded that my feelings about environmental change and climate change affect my life on a daily basis. At least, affected my eating, my concentration, my participation in school, and so forth. There was also a question of if you have shared your views and opinion about the environment or climate change with decision makers, do you think it made a difference? Majority responded yes. No, let me go back. 196 responded yes. The majority responded no, they're not aware, don't know that, or the process of how they voice their opinion. 96 don't know, and 21 no response. What do you think about the following statement? When I try to talk about the environment and climate change, other people have ignored or dismissed me. Majority of them responded yes, that the statement is true, meaning that they're not, their voice is not considered or not heard or translated into decisions, the program decisions at the national level down to the community level. That'll go back. Now, the key takeaways from the findings: young people and children feel that they are not included, in particular the decision-making around climate change. It was clearly articulated that there's fear that they are the most affected and will be the most vulnerable with climate change impacts. I have in the data respondents who survived the 2009 tsunami, some who were only 4 and some who were only 5 years old at the time. The survey was the first time for them to share their lived experiences of then, their experiences and what they're going through till today. One share, and I quote, 10 years ago today, and we are still mourning. Whilst mourning, we are also in the midst of a lot of uncertainties. Loss of identity as we used to live near the sea. Now the sea and the land is us. We are the land and the sea. Government moved us inland. Some of us are facing the realities of disputes of the lands that we are living on while still mourning. And some of us are still trying to come to terms with losing a parent or a sibling. Some of us have been violated when we were put in shelters. End of quote. Young people and our children's feelings and emotions have always been taken for granted. Often during the climate negotiations, young people and children are not around the table. There's still a very strong thinking that they are too young or still not matured enough to speak up and to put on the table what they would like to be considered. However, if you look around the first respondents in any disaster, you will find that there's always been young people who are at the forefront. When we are having conversations around politics of climate change, it is more than physical inclusion of youth and children around the table. It's ensuring that when we tell or dialogue about climate change financing, for instance, that our children and youth are represented and that the voices are translated into financial actions and resource commitments at all levels. Samoa has taken a people-centered approach to achieving its vision and mission in the pathway for the development of Samoa 2021-2026. With the current decentralization of development efforts through the District Development Project, which is a government initiative, we are anticipating improvement on the inclusion of our youth and our children in the climate change domestic politics and the dialogue. Whaftaitele to the Department of Pacific Affairs for the Ministry of Women, Community and Social Development's opportunity to speak and to share about the survey that we just did. Manuia tele whātou whālainga, soifua mai manuia.
Thanks very much, Mema, for that. I feel a bit lost for words actually at this point in time, trying to fill in while Betty gets ready. But I guess it strikes me how often we talk about community resilience, or that community has been consulted. We really need to think about what that means and not get lazy about who is community. And Betty is going to reinforce that message loud and clear right now, I think, if you're ready to go, Betty.
Okay, thank you everybody for your patience, and I'll make sure to keep it as as efficient and relevant as possible. My PhD thesis is actually looking at the gendered impacts of climate change-induced planned relocation and forced displacement in the Fijian case study. So I am towards the final end, so you can consider this a a show of preliminary findings of 2 chapters. I am limited by time here and 80,000 words in my thesis. So if any of these areas look really good to you, please reach out to me and we can figure out the wordings later. I'll put this up quicker. As you know, and as the Fijian government has been one of the few governments that has been very vocal about climate change-induced planned relocation. Pacific leaders are having conversations about it. I am also part of a small team that's working with Pacific Island leaders, developing the climate change regional framework on climate-induced human mobility. So we know that this is going to happen, and we know that this is going to be the absolute last resort. What my research actually does is not only look at villages that have been relocated, but also looked at communities and households that have been identified for future relocations. And that includes looking at multi-ethnic communities on the western coast of Viti Levu, which included indigenous Fijians, Indo-Fijians, and those of mixed ethnicities that are housed and will be impacted, some of which fall outside of traditional village boundaries, which puts them in a little bit of a tricky situation, because planned relocation national efforts are actually targeted at villages and communities so that they follow a particular protocol. And as you can see by the direct quotes from my participants, there are a wide range of findings that I have. A very exciting one for this room is researchers, NGOs, and government people come and go, but our God stays with us, and I think everybody that's researched in the Pacific knows what that means. A few months ago, I presented right here on the methodology that I have approached in my thesis, and I'm happy to talk to people about it afterwards. But the one thing that I will talk about is that and it can't really be called preliminary because I'm really reviewing my final draft, but the contested process of planned relocation is actually significantly shifting power dynamics. My thesis is grounded in political economy analysis, but I am also a feminist, and I am also a Pacific Islander. So naturally, the intersections of that have influenced significantly the analysis and the stories that I tell throughout this process. The findings do reveal that there are instances of double displacement. And so community, culture, and custodianship are very important components in the Pacific context. And this is across the intersections of ethnicity, age, gender, and geographical location. I think one of the important things that actually came out was across the intersections of ethnicity and age, the custodianship element of what it meant to be connected to the land or the place was something very important, and people wanted to hold on to it in any way possible, however they could. Despite moving across for various reasons, once again, I'd also like to reiterate that climate change wasn't the sole reason people were moving. There were various other socioeconomic, political components to it. And in the case of double displacement, there was actually one or two families that were politically displaced in the 2000 coup that are now going to be displaced by climate change impacts or natural disasters, who also, I think there was an interesting statement one participant made. It was like, our ancestors were Girmitias. It feels like we're going to be doing the same thing again. And so I thought that was extremely powerful, which also leads to intergenerational equity. One of the other components that came through, particularly for indigenous and Indo-Fijian families that I spoke to, was that of intergenerational equity. It was about wanting to make a change so that things were better for the younger generation or the future generation. And in trying to do so, there were various components of norm diffusion, and that was recognizing that yes, women, girls and boys are going to be equals in the future. And that was investing in women and girls and boys education, which I think is a result of various decades of investment by civil society movements, by the government, in actually making education free or training them on human rights or whatever these trainings. It's working. There is norm diffusion, there is hope. And so there were very heartwarming stories, which will be very, which is captured in detail in my thesis. But norm diffusion is evolving. There is also a regeneration of power in terms of within the younger participants that I interviewed, and that showed not only a norm diffusion in terms of recognizing that yes, I am indigenous Fijian, or yes, I am Indo-Fijian, or yes, I am of mixed ethnicity, but it's also about there's a sort of fluidity around that, and recognizing that climate change is actually impacting all of us severely, and so we all need to work together, which then talks to the solidarity dividend aspect of it. I think there were various stories from the field, not only from the families that I interviewed, but also the key informants that I engaged with, that showed and demonstrated political willingness across intersections, that people wanted to work together because they recognized climate change was going to be a challenge that affected everyone. And so in recognizing that component was going to severely impact people, there was willingness for solidarity, which I think pays off eventually, hence the framing of solidarity dividend. And lastly, I speak to the regeneration of power across intersections, which I earlier mentioned. I think there were various components of younger people reclaiming the power, and this was beyond ethnicities and beyond age, and because I spoke to people largely on the Western Coast as families, but also key informants that are naturally based out of the capital, there was this acknowledgement that people knew what they were talking about, but gendered norms continue to dictate how people engage within the community setting. But the households have become sites of power regeneration. Young women feel that their voices are heard within their families. Young people actually feel that they are more comfortable having difficult conversations. And while the culture of silence continues to dictate how people engage in the social setting outside of their households, the household is becoming a safe space for people to have conversations, and I think that's a site of regeneration of power that I am examining quite thoroughly in my thesis. And because I am efficient and adaptable, I will, and I want to give everybody a chance to have a conversation.